He was a personal slave, until the human freed her and made her his wife. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's get back to our main character. The wind scraped across the abandoned outpost like a dull blade, dragging dust and metal flakes through the narrow corridors as Evan Hale stepped inside, his flashlight cutting a thin line through the darkness. The readings on his wrist scanner jittered in and out, the old wiring humming like something alive beneath the steel floor. He'd come here looking for spare coils to fix his broken generator back at camp, not expecting anything more than rusted hinges, dead terminals, and the faint chemical smell of decades-old coolant. But then he heard it, a soft metallic click, like someone shifting a chain. Evan froze, breath caught in his throat. Another sound followed, a shallow inhale, shaky and thin. He pushed deeper into the old holding wing, passing cracked energy barriers and shattered control panels until his light landed on a figure curled against the far wall. A young woman. No, not human. Her skin a muted silver gray that reflected the beam in trembling shivers. A collar circled her neck, a dull black ring with crimson indicators pulsing weakly, the kind used by old trafficking cartels before the treaties banned them. She flinched at the light, arms instinctively covering her head, the motion so practiced and hopeless it hollowed something in Evan's chest. "Hey," he said softly, lowering the flashlight. "I'm not here to hurt you." She didn't look up. She didn't even breathe right, just small, clipped gasps, the kind people made when expecting pain. Evan knelt slowly, palms open. The concrete was cold under his knee pads, and the air smelled like dust and fear. Up close, he could see faint bruising around the collar, skin irritated where the metal had rubbed raw. He reached toward the device, but she recoiled violently, the collar sparking with a painful jolt that made her cry out. "Easy, easy," Evan whispered. "I'm trying to help." She shook her head, voice barely audible. "I serve. Do not interfere." The words were monotone, carved by obedience rather than belief. Evan exhaled, steady and low. "No one's here to own you," he said. "Not anymore." For the first time she glanced at him, eyes a pale violet that carried exhaustion deeper than the room itself. Evan pulled a multi-tool from his belt, flipping out a plasma cutter small enough not to frighten her. The collar hissed when he brought the heat close, warning systems trying to revive themselves from dying power cells. Sparks kissed his forearm, but he kept going, focusing on each tiny cut, each failing diode collapsing under the tool's glow. "Hold still," he murmured. Almost. A final snap rang through the room. The collar loosened, falling into his hand with a heavy metallic thud. The alien girl collapsed forward, catching herself on his jacket, fingers shaking uncontrollably. Her first breath without the collar trembled through her whole body. Evan didn't speak. He just draped his jacket over her shoulders, shielding her from the cold draft sneaking through the cracked ceiling. She stiffened at the unexpected kindness, unsure how to respond to a gesture with no command behind it. "Let's get you out of here," he said, his voice quiet but firm, the kind of voice people trusted without knowing why. She blinked up at him, as if struggling to process a world where someone offered help without claiming ownership. In that dim room, with dust floating through the flashlight beam like drifting snow, something small but irreversible shifted inside her, a question she had never allowed herself to ask. "Why?" Evan met her eyes. "Because you deserve better than this." And for the first time, she believed it might be true. The desert air outside the abandoned outpost bit at Evan Hale's cheeks as he guided the silver-skinned girl through the ruined doorway, his arms steadying her as her legs wobbled with each tentative step. The jacket he had draped over her earlier hung loosely from her shoulders, far too large for her small frame, but she held it tightly, as if it were armor. The sky above them had shifted to a deep orange, the sun dipping low behind jagged rock formations, casting long shadows across the ground. Evan knew his camp was only half a mile away, but with her condition it might as well have been 10. Every few steps she would pause, her breath hitching like someone not used to choosing her own pace. "You doing all right?" Evan asked, keeping his tone soft. She hesitated, as if weighing the safety of answering a question that was not in order. "I think so," she whispered, her voice barely louder than the wind. "What is your name?" he asked gently. She blinked, confused by the idea of being asked something so personal without threat attached. "Lyra," she said finally. The word trembled out of her, like it had been locked behind her teeth for years. Evan nodded, guiding her over a patch of loose gravel. "Okay, Lyra. My name is Evan. You can lean on me if you need to." The way she looked at him then was not trust yet, but something close to surprise. They reached the small ridge overlooking his camp, a cluster of prefab units wrapped around a generator that hummed unevenly. Lights flickered inside the main shelter, fighting against the encroaching dusk. As they approached, Lyra's steps faltered again, her gaze fixed on the shelter's metal door, and a wave of fear washed over her features. "Is it a cell?" she asked, her voice shaking. Evan shook his head immediately. "No, just a place to stay warm. A normal room. Your room, if you want it." She stared at him as if trying to decode whether the words could be real. Evan opened the door slowly, letting her see inside. A small cot, a heating unit, a desk cluttered with tools, and shelves filled with spare parts. It was messy, but lived in, human in all the small ways that mattered. "Go on," he said. "It is safe." Lyra stepped inside, as if crossing an invisible barrier. She reached out, touching the metal wall with the tip of her fingers, tracing the cold surface like she expected it to bite back. Her next breath came steadier, warmer. Evan set down his gear and rummaged for a medkit. "Let me check your neck. That collar must have done a number on you." Lyra stiffened, instinctively bracing. He noticed and slowed his movements, keeping everything deliberate. "I am just cleaning the burns. Not touching anything else." She nodded once, stiff but willing. Evan knelt behind her as she sat on the edge of the cot. Up close, the marks around her neck were worse than he expected, angry red welts shaped by years of friction and electric discharge. He applied a cooling salve, and Lyra sucked in a sharp breath at the sting. "Sorry," he murmured. "This part will hurt a little." "Pain is normal," she said quietly. "Pain means I obeyed." Evan paused, his jaw tightening. "Not anymore." She went still, as if the words themselves were too big to absorb all at once. When he finished tending her neck, he stepped back to give her space. Lyra studied him carefully, her pale violet eyes trying to understand a man who did not treat her like property. "Evan," she said softly, as if testing the name. "Why did you take me with you?" He shrugged, rubbing the back of his neck. "Because leaving you there would have been wrong." She lowered her gaze, fingertips brushing the edge of the jacket he had given her. "No one has ever said that before." Her voice cracked, the smallest fracture in years of silence. Outside, the wind hit the side of the shelter, rattling the panels. Evan stood up and grabbed a spare blanket, placing it carefully beside her on the cot. "You are safe here, Lyra. Tonight, you sleep. Tomorrow, we figure out what comes next." She lifted her eyes again, something fragile and new beginning to take shape behind them. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe that tomorrow might be hers to decide. Morning came slowly on that barren world, the first hints of daylight sliding across the metal walls of Evan Hale's shelter in thin, pale lines. The generator's uneven hum pressed softly against the silence as Evan stepped out of his small room, rubbing sleep from his eyes while the chill of dawn nipped at his skin. He glanced toward the cot, where Lyra slept beneath the blanket he had left for her. She was curled tightly, silver skin faintly catching the weak light, her breathing steady but shallow, like someone afraid to take up too much space. Evan knelt beside her gently. "Lyra," he said softly, "I made breakfast if you feel like eating." Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused for a moment, until she remembered where she was. Instinct flickered across her face, the kind that braced for an order or punishment. But Evan simply offered her a steaming cup of instant broth, the closest thing to comfort food he had out here. She stared at it, as if he had handed her something forbidden. "For me?" she asked. "Yeah," he said, settling onto the crate across from her. "For you." Lyra held the cup in both hands, warming her fingers around it. She lifted it slowly, taking a careful sip. The smallest, cautious sigh escaped her, the kind that came from tasting warmth after years of cold. Evan watched her with an easy calm, not wanting to interrupt whatever this moment was for her. When she set the cup down, she looked around the room with a new kind of alertness. Do you live alone? She asked. Evan nodded. Yeah, just me. The mining company shut down months ago, but they still pay me to maintain the remote systems. Nobody else wanted to stay this far out. Lyra studied him, her silver brows drawing together slightly. You chose to live apart from your people. Guess so, he said. I like the quiet. And nobody telling me what to do. She absorbed that slowly, like she was turning the idea over in her mind. Freedom, she whispered. You live in freedom. Evan did not answer right away. Instead, he adjusted the generator panel beside him, tightening a bolt that had been rattling all night. Sparks danced briefly before stabilizing. Everyone should, he said quietly. Lyra looked down at her hands. Where I come from, freedom is something only the powerful have. Those with no status serve them. Those born into the wrong family are taken. She touched her neck unconsciously, her fingers stopping just above the faint marks left by the collar. I was taken. Evan set down his tool and leaned forward slightly. Do you remember who took you? She hesitated, her breath catching. I remember a ship. I remember cages. I remember voices deciding who belonged to whom. Her eyes darkened. I belonged to no one, so they made me property. Evan's jaw tightened. He hated the idea of anybody being treated like that, but he kept his voice steady. You do not belong to anyone now. Lyra nodded, though her shoulders remained tense, as if waiting for the world to contradict him. A beep from Evan's wrist console broke the stillness. He checked it, frowning. Scanners picked up something, he said. A transport passed through upper atmosphere last night. Probably patrol. Or salvage crew, but I need to check the perimeter. Lyra stiffened instantly. If they find me, they will not. Evan reassured quickly. You stay here. Door locks from the inside. Do not open it for anyone but me. She swallowed hard, gripping the blanket. Will you come back? He smiled gently. Of course I will. As he headed for the door, Lyra lifted her voice softly. Evan. He paused. Thank you, she said, the words fragile but sincere. He gave her a small nod, then stepped into the cold morning air, scanning the horizon. The wind tugged at his jacket as he approached the ridge, dust swirling around his boots. In the distance, something glinted, a piece of metal half buried in the sand, reflecting sunlight like a warning flare. Evan moved closer, crouching to inspect it. His stomach sank. It was a piece of hull plating, branded with a mark he recognized from old reports, a trafficking syndicate emblem, the same type used by the groups that sold people like Lyra. His pulse quickened. They were back in this sector. Maybe searching. Maybe tracking someone who escaped. He straightened slowly, eyes on the horizon, and whispered to himself. I need to get her somewhere safe. Fast. Far behind him, inside the shelter, Lyra sat on the edge of the cot, clutching Evan's oversized jacket and listening to the fading echo of his footsteps, unaware that the past she feared might already be closing in on her. The piece of hull plating felt heavier in Evan Hale's hand than its size should allow, the metal cold even beneath the warming sun as he turned it over and saw the trafficking syndicate emblem burned into it. The mark looked freshly scorched, meaning whoever dropped it had been here recently, maybe hours ago, and the thought sent a sharp surge of adrenaline through his chest. He slipped the shard into his jacket pocket and scanned the horizon again, eyes narrowed against the glare. Nothing but sand, rock, and far-off heat distortion. But that meant nothing. Slavers did not announce themselves. Evan headed back toward his shelter, his boots crunching over the brittle ground, each step tightening the knot in his stomach. He rehearsed explanations in his head, not wanting to panic Lyra, but not willing to lie to her either. When he reached the doorway, he knocked twice, the signal he had taught her. The lock hissed, disengaging, and the door cracked open just enough for her pale violet eyes to peek through before she let him in. She stood wrapped in his jacket, sleeves hanging past her hands, looking both small and impossibly brave. You came back, she said softly. Evan managed a faint smile. I told you I would. She stepped aside for him, and he closed the door behind them, sliding the locking bar across. Lyra watched him closely as he set his gear down. Something is wrong, she murmured, reading the tension in his shoulders. Evan hesitated only a moment before pulling the shard of metal from his pocket and placing it gently on the table. Lyra's breath hitched. Her hands trembled. That symbol, she whispered, voice cracking. I know it. Evan nodded. I figured you might. She backed away from the table until her calves hit the edge of the cot, Then she sank onto it, hugging her knees to her chest. They were here, she said. The ones who took me. They were looking for runaways on every world they touched. Evan crouched in front of her, keeping his tone steady even as worry gnawed at him. It does not mean they know you are here. Could be coincidence. Could be they were passing through. But Lyra shook her head. They never travel without purpose. If they came, they are searching. Evan exhaled slowly, thinking through his limited options. His small settlement was too exposed. If the traffickers swept the area with thermal drones or bioscanners, they would detect her immediately. He had no transport capable of reaching orbit and no nearby settlements to ask for help. I am not letting them take you, he said firmly. You are safe with me. Lyra stared at him, a war between fear and hope flickering in her eyes. You do not understand, she whispered. They do not want to reclaim lost property. They want to erase anything that exposes their routes. If they find me alive, they will kill you first. Evan's jaw tightened. Then we make sure they do not find us at all. He stood and moved to a storage locker near the generator room, pulling it open with a metallic groan. Lyra watched as he retrieved a small emergency duffel, spare energy cells, and an old tracking jammer he had repaired months ago but never used. We head north, he said. There is an old communications tower in the canyon. It has a deep underground shelter and a secure entrance hatch. No way scanners pick us up if we get in there. Lyra blinked at him, the enormity of what he was doing settling over her. You would leave your home. Everything you know. For me. Evan paused, meeting her gaze. I am not leaving it for you, he said softly. I am leaving it with you. She looked down, overwhelmed by the weight of his words, and something inside her shifted, a fragile and unfamiliar warmth. While Evan packed supplies, she stood slowly and approached him, her steps hesitant but purposeful. Evan, she said, her voice quiet yet steady. I do not know what freedom is supposed to feel like. But staying with you feels like something close. Evan's breath caught for a moment, but he only nodded gently. Then we hold on to that. And we keep moving. Winds battered the small shelter as they prepared to leave, the sky darkening with an incoming dust front. As Lyra pulled the hood of his jacket over her silver hair, she took one last glance around the room, realizing this place had been the first space where she had ever been allowed to breathe without fear. Evan opened the door, gripping his pack tightly. Stay close, he said. She stepped beside him, her shoulder brushing his. I will, she whispered. Together they stepped into the rising storm, unaware that just beyond the ridge, two distant figures stood beside a landing skiff, scanning the sands for signs of something, or someone, who was never meant to escape. The dust storm rose behind Evan Hale and Lyra like a living wall, sweeping across the barren landscape with a low growl that rattled loose stones and tugged at their clothes. Evan kept one arm around Lyra as they pushed forward toward the canyon, his pack bouncing against his back with each hurried step. The wind stung his face, slicing tiny grains of sand across his skin, but he did not slow down. Lyra moved beside him as best she could, her breath uneven, legs trembling from exhaustion and fear, but she never let go of his sleeve, holding on to him like the only solid thing in a world that kept shifting beneath her feet. As they reached the mouth of the canyon, the winds abruptly softened, trapped by the towering rock walls on either side. The sudden quiet was disorienting, making every breath sound too loud. Evan checked the tracker jammer strapped to his belt. Its green light pulsed steadily, masking their biosignatures from long-range scans. We are almost there, he said, pointing toward a jagged ridge ahead. The entrance to the old communications shelter is hidden behind those rocks. Lyra nodded, even as her steps grew slower. I can make it, she whispered, more to herself than to him. Evan noticed the tremor in her voice and shifted his arm so she could lean on him more fully. You do not have to prove anything. We go at your pace. Her eyes lifted toward him briefly, softened by something warm and uncertain. They reached the ridge, and Evan knelt to brush sand away from a rusted hatch partially buried in the ground. He wiped his forearm across his forehead, then pried up the panel with a metal bar. The hatch groaned open, releasing a breath of cool air that tasted like metal and forgotten years. After you, he said, shining his flashlight into the darkness below. Lyra hesitated, staring into the narrow ladder shaft descending into blackness. Dark places were where they kept us, she whispered. Evan's expression softened. He reached out his hand. You are not alone in this one. She took his hand with surprising steadiness and climbed down, her silver fingers gripping each rung tightly. Evan followed, closing the hatch behind them. The shelter below was small but intact, lit by dim emergency strips that flickered to life as their boots touched the floor. Dust coated the consoles and equipment racks, but the room felt secure, shielded by thick rock walls that would block most scans. Lyra moved slowly around the room, running her hand over the cold metal, her breath steadying. It feels quiet, she said. Like the air is waiting. Evan smiled faintly. This place was built for storms. It is meant to hold strong. She turned to him, and for the first time, he saw the faintest trace of peace in her eyes. But the moment was brief. The console on the far wall crackled to life unexpectedly, its static-filled display flickering. Evan hurried to it, adjusting the knobs. A distorted voice broke through the interference, sharp and mechanical. Unit 2 reporting. Signal anomaly detected, Quadrant 6 sweep. Repeat, Quadrant 6 sweep. Lyra froze. That is them. Evan shut off the console quickly, heart pounding. They are close, but they do not know exactly where we are. Lyra stepped closer, her fingers gripping the edge of the table. They will find me. They always find those who escape. They cannot allow witnesses to live. Evan straightened and turned to her, his voice firm. Lyra, listen to me. They are not taking you back. Not while I am breathing. She stared at him, struggling to understand a promise no one had ever made to her before. Why? She whispered. His voice softened, the truth slipping out without hesitation. Because you have worth. Because you deserve to live free. Because no one gets to decide your life but you. Lyra's breath trembled, and her hand rose unconsciously to clutch the front of his jacket, the same one she had been wearing since he first rescued her. I do not know how to be anything other than what they made me, she said, voice shaking. Evan placed his hand gently over hers. Then we figure it out together. A distant rumble echoed through the canyon above, the kind that did not belong to thunder or shifting rock. Lyra's eyes widened. They brought a skiff, she whispered. Evan, they are here. Evan grabbed his pack, slung it over his shoulder, and reached for her hand. Then we stay in the shadows, stay quiet, and stay smart. We have time. They do not know we went underground. Lyra stepped closer, gripping his hand tightly, her fear meeting something steadier inside her. Together they stood in the dim shelter, listening to the distant hum grow louder as the traffickers searched the canyon above, unaware that the girl they hunted was no longer a slave, no longer alone, and no longer willing to surrender her life without a fight. The distant hum above the canyon grew into a low, vibrating throb that settled into the stone walls of the underground shelter, making the dim emergency lights flicker. Evan Hale stood perfectly still, one hand braced on the console, the other holding Lyra's trembling fingers as they listened to the traffickers sweep the ridge. Dust drifted down from the ceiling with each pulse of the skiff's engines, tiny grains shimmering in the flashlight beam. Lyra's breath shook, but she kept. Her other hand pressed against her chest, trying to steady herself as memories clawed up from the deepest corners of her mind. Evan squeezed her hand gently. They cannot see us down here, he whispered. The rock is too dense for their scanners. She nodded, though her eyes stayed fixed upward, as if expecting the ceiling to tear open at any second. The rumble shifted, engines dropping into a lower register, followed by the faint whine of drones being released. Evan recognized the sound immediately. He had heard it during old field drills. Search drones, he murmured. Short range. They are looking for heat signatures, not life signs. Lyra's voice cracked. They will not stop. They must erase all record of what they did. Evan looked at her, the pale glow of the emergency strips casting shadows across her face. Lyra, he said quietly, I need you to trust one thing right now. You are not going back with them. I am not letting that happen. She swallowed hard. I do not want to be a burden. Evan almost laughed, not out of humor but disbelief that she could even think that. You are not a burden, he said firmly. You are a person. You matter. That is the difference. Her eyes softened, but before she could speak, a loud metallic clang echoed from above. Something heavy had landed directly over the shelter. Lyra flinched violently and backed up until her shoulders met the cold wall. Evan moved toward the ladder hatch, listening. Voices drifted through the stone, distorted but unmistakably hostile. Sweep downwind. Her tracker signature might still be dormant. Do not leave footprints. Command wants a clean pass. If she is alive, she dies. If someone is hiding her, they die first. Evan's jaw clenched. These were not simple hunters. These were enforcers. He stepped back from the ladder and turned to Lyra. We need to stay quiet. They will not find the hatch unless they dig. Lyra hugged herself tightly, her silver skin reflecting faint light. They took dozens like me, she whispered. Some were my age. Some younger. Those who fought back, they made examples of them. Evan crossed the small room and sat beside her on the narrow bench, his shoulder brushing hers. No one deserves that. Not then. Not now. She stared at him, her breath slowing. Why do you care so much? She asked. You could have left me there. You could leave me now. There is no reason for you to put yourself in danger. Evan rested his elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. Maybe the universe just needs someone to do the right thing once in a while, he murmured. And maybe today that someone is me. Lyra studied him, something fragile blooming behind her fear. The hum above shifted again, followed by the heavy clatter of a landing ramp. Evan stiffened. They are deploying, he whispered. We need a plan. Lyra moved closer, her voice barely audible. There is something you should know. Evan looked at her. What is it? She hesitated, gathering courage she had not known she still had. I was not just taken because I was alone. I was taken because of who I am. My family, they were part of the Silvarin Council. The traffickers wanted leverage. When my father refused to comply with them, they took me. Evan's eyes widened slightly. Lyra, you are not just anyone. She shook her head. Not anymore. My family believes I am dead. That is why the traffickers need to ensure no one finds me. Evan stood, running a hand through his hair as he processed this. A kidnapped council heir. A trafficking ring desperate to erase evidence. And a remote planet with no communication tech strong enough to reach off-world authorities without the tower's long-range dish. He turned back to her, eyes steady. Then we get you to that tower. We send a signal. We let someone know you are alive. Lyra blinked, stunned by his certainty. You would do that? I am already doing that, he said. Footsteps echoed faintly from above, closer now. The traffickers were splitting up. Evan grabbed the pack, slung it across his shoulder, and extended his hand. We move when the scanners pass by again. Quiet. Fast. No hesitation. Lyra stared at his hand for a long heartbeat, then placed her trembling fingers in his. I trust you, she whispered. Outside, the skiff engines roared, drones buzzing through the canyon like angry insects, unaware that deep beneath their feet, a human and an alien girl were preparing to take back a stolen life, one quiet breath at a time. The drones swept across the canyon in tightening arcs, their mechanical wings slicing the air with a sharp metallic whine that vibrated through the stone beneath Evan Hale's boots. He stood at the bottom of the ladder hatch, listening to their patterns, every sense focused on timing their next move. Lyra stood beside him, her fingers twisting nervously in the fabric of his jacket sleeve, her breath shallow but steadying with each quiet inhale. The emergency lights flickered again, a reminder that the shelter was not built for long-term occupation and certainly not for hiding from a trafficking squad armed with high-frequency scanners. Evan adjusted the pack on his shoulder and checked the jammer strapped to his belt. Its green pulse was weakening, the battery slowly draining under the heavy drone activity above. We have to go soon, he whispered. Before this thing dies. Lyra swallowed hard. I am ready. He met her eyes, searching for doubt, but all he saw was determination layered over fear. She had spent her life being ordered, controlled, and conditioned to obey without question, yet she stood here now choosing to act, choosing to run towards something rather than away. He pushed the ladder hatch open an inch. Dust drifted down, illuminated by a narrow sliver of morning light. The storm had passed, leaving the sky pale and washed out, but the traffickers had not. Evan peeked over the rim of the hatch. Two figures in dark armor swept their scanners across the canyon floor. Their visors glowed red, and their boots left deep imprints in the sand. A third drone hovered behind them, pinging quietly as it scanned rock structures. They are too close, Evan murmured. We wait for them to pass the north ridge. When they turn their backs, we move. Lyra nodded, gripping the rung of the ladder as if preparing herself physically as well as mentally. Minutes crawled by like hours. The wind whispered through the canyon again, dislodging loose pebbles that clattered down the slopes. The traffickers murmured through their helmet comms, their voices sharp, irritated. They were not finding what they came for. That made them more dangerous. Finally, the two armored figures turned, their scanners sweeping toward the far ridge. The drone followed. Evan exhaled. Now, he whispered. Lyra climbed first, quiet as a shadow, her movements careful and precise. Evan followed, closing the hatch behind them. They crouched behind a natural rock outcrop, the stone still warm from the rising sun. Beyond them, the canyon stretched, wide, leading toward the old communications tower several miles north. Evan pointed. We keep low. Move from cover to cover. If a drone sweeps this way, press against the rock and do not move. Lyra nodded once. I will do exactly as you say. They moved quickly but silently, weaving between boulders and jagged formations. Evan kept glancing up at the ridges, tracking drone shadows as they passed overhead. Every rumble of engines, every crackle of static made Lyra flinch, but she stayed beside him, matching his pace. Halfway through the canyon, a sharp chirp erupted from the jammer on Evan's belt. The green light sputtered, then shifted to yellow. The battery is dying, he muttered. We need to reach the tower before it fails completely. Lyra's breathing quickened, but she kept going, her fingers brushing his hand as if anchoring herself to his presence. They reached another rock outcrop when the skiff's engines roared to life again. Evan pressed Lyra against the stone wall, shielding her with his body. The skiff swept overhead, barely 20 feet above them, sand blasting across their faces as they ducked. The searchlight skimmed the canyon walls, missing them by inches. Lyra's heart pounded against Evan's chest, her trembling obvious even through his jacket. When the skiff passed, Evan tilted her chin up gently. You did great, he whispered. We are almost there. She stared at him, her pale violet eyes wide but steady. I am not afraid when you are with me. He swallowed, surprised by how deeply her words hit him, but there was no time to dwell on it. They continued, and soon the communications tower came into view, its metal frame rising crookedly from the canyon floor like a skeleton from an old war. Its access door was half buried in sand, but intact. There, Evan said. Once we get inside, we can activate the dish and send a distress signal to the Silvarin High Council. They will know you survived. Lyra stopped, staring at the tower with something like disbelief. I never thought I would see my people again. Evan turned to her. Lyra, you are going home. But before she could respond, a crack of energy tore through the air behind them. The ground near Evan's foot exploded in a burst of sand and rock. A voice shouted from the ridge. There. They are running north. Move in. Evan grabbed Lyra's hand, pulling her forward as armored figures spilled over the ridge, their rifles charging for another shot. Lyra stumbled but kept pace, her fear swallowed by desperate resolve. Evan ran harder, his lungs burning, dragging her toward the tower as the traffickers closed in behind them. The second shot missed by inches. The third did not. The third blast struck the rock beside Evan Hale with a violent crack that sent shards spraying across his arm, tearing through fabric and skin. He stumbled but did not fall. Instead, he tightened his grip on Lyra's hand and pushed forward with a surge of adrenaline that drowned out the pain. Lyra gasped when she saw the blood seeping down his forearm, but Evan shook his head hard. Keep moving, he said, breath ragged. We are almost to the door. The communications tower loomed ahead, its structure groaning softly in the wind, metal ribs rising like the bones of some long-buried giant. The access hatch was only 20 yards away now, half hidden beneath drifting sand. Lyra ran beside him, her legs trembling but her determination unbroken. Behind them, the traffickers shouted commands, their boots pounding against stone as they closed the distance. A drone swept overhead, searchlights slicing across the canyon floor. Target the human first, one of the armored figures barked. He is shielding the asset. Evan did not look back. He could feel the heat of a charging rifle at his heels, could sense the moment the traffickers raised their weapons again, but he forced his body to move faster. Lyra stumbled on a loose stone, catching herself on his arm, and for a moment Evan thought he might lose his footing. But she steadied herself and pushed forward again. Her voice trembled as she spoke. Evan, they are going to shoot you. Not if we get inside, he answered, though he was not entirely sure it was true. The next blast screamed past his shoulder, scorching the air with a spray of sparks. They reached the hatch, and Evan dropped to his knees, clawing at the sand with one hand while the other yanked at the rusted handle. "Come on," he growled, pulling with all his strength. The hatch jerked, resisted, then finally tore free with a groan that echoed through the canyon. He shoved Lyra toward the opening. "Go." She hesitated only long enough to grab his injured arm. "You first. You are hurt." "It is nothing," he lied. "Down the ladder." "Now." She obeyed, climbing down into the shadows of the tower's underground access chamber. Evan descended after her, pulling the hatch shut just as another blast struck it from above with a deafening clang. The impact rattled the ladder and sent both of them tumbling the last few feet to the floor. Evan hit the ground hard, groaning as pain shot through his arm and ribs. Lyra rushed to his side, her hands fluttering anxiously over the wound. "Evan, you are bleeding. There is too much blood." He winced as she pressed her palm against his forearm, trying to stop the flow. "I will be fine," he forced out. "We need to activate the tower before they breach the hatch." The underground chamber was dimly lit by failing emergency strips, dust floating in the air like drifting snow. A staircase led deeper into the communications core, lined with old consoles and wiring that flickered weakly as the tower strained to wake after decades of silence. "Help me up," Evan said. Lyra slipped her arm under his good one, lifting him with surprising steadiness. Together they staggered down into the heart of the tower. The main console stood against the far wall, coated in dust and rust but still intact. Evan slumped into the chair, his breath shaking as he wiped blood from his fingers and began pressing power switches. The console flickered, sputtered, then hummed to life. Ancient lights blinked across its surface. "Communication array is operational at 40%. A robotic voice droned through static. Lyra stepped closer, eyes wide with awe and fear. "Can you send a signal?" "If the dish rotates," Evan said, gripping the joystick with his good hand. He pushed it forward, and the tower above them groaned, metal grinding as the massive dish slowly turned toward the sky. Outside, the traffickers pounded on the hatch again, their voices muffled but furious. "Open it. The scanner shows movement below." Lyra flinched as the hatch shook violently, dust raining down from the ceiling. "They are breaking through," she whispered, voice cracking. Evan hit the transmit button. A sharp burst of energy surged through the console, sending a beam of encoded data into the sky. They both held their breath. "Signal sent," the robotic voice confirmed. "Recipient, Silvarin Council. Awaiting acknowledgement." Lyra's eyes filled with tears she did not understand. "They will know I am alive," she whispered. "My people will hear me." Evan leaned back, exhausted, blood dripping from his fingertips. "You are going home, Lyra." But before she could answer, a tremendous metallic screech echoed from above. The hatch hinges snapped. Heavy boots struck the ladder. The traffickers had breached the tower, and they were coming down. The metal ladder groaned under the weight of armored boots as the traffickers descended into the communications tower, their rifles glowing with heated charge as they swept the narrow shaft. Evan Hale forced himself upright, his injured arm pressed against his ribs as he stepped in front of Lyra, placing himself between her and the advancing shadows. The emergency lights flickered again, painting the chamber in pulses of orange and white, each flash revealing the fear in Lyra's eyes and the determination in Evan's. "Stay behind me," he whispered. She shook her head, voice trembling. "Evan, you are hurt. They will kill you first." He did not deny it. Instead, he gripped the edge of the console with his good hand and typed a command sequence as fast as his fading strength allowed. The communications dish above them locked its alignment, and the console responded with a steady tone. "Signal confirmed by Silvarin Council," the robotic voice announced. "Response vessel inbound. Estimated arrival, 3 minutes." Lyra gasped, tears filling her pale violet eyes. "My people are coming." Evan managed a small, tired smile. "Good. That means we just have to buy 3 minutes." The first trafficker dropped from the ladder, landing heavily on the floor, visor glowing red as he raised his weapon toward them. Evan shoved Lyra behind the console and grabbed a metal pipe from the floor, swinging it with desperate strength. The pipe crashed against the trafficker's wrist, knocking the rifle aside as the blast fired into the wall, sending sparks flying. The second trafficker landed behind the first, shouting, "Eliminate the human. Secure the asset." Lyra's breath hitched as Evan blocked another strike, the pipe clanging against armored plating. The trafficker slammed a heavy elbow into Evan's ribs, forcing a cry of pain from him as he staggered back. Lyra moved instinctively toward him, but Evan thrust his hand out. "Stay back," he shouted. "Do not let them take you." The trafficker lunged. Evan barely dodged, swinging. The pipe again, buying a precious second, but his strength was fading and his wounded arm hung useless at his side. The pipe slipped from his grasp, clattering across the floor. The trafficker raised his rifle point-blank at Evan's chest. Lyra screamed, "No!" And without thinking she stepped between them, her small frame shielding him. The trafficker froze, his finger hovering over the trigger. Lyra lifted her chin, trembling but resolute. "You cannot kill me," she said, voice ringing through the chamber. "I am Lyra Vallis of the Silvarin High Council. If you harm me, your entire syndicate will be hunted to extinction." The trafficker hesitated, his visor flickering as the identity skin matched her features. "Impossible," he muttered. "You were declared dead." "You made that lie," Lyra said. "But now my people know the truth. Your time is over." A blast of blinding blue light erupted from above, cutting through the ceiling like a blade. Shockwaves shook the tower as a Silvarin vessel descended, its engines roaring with righteous fury. The traffickers staggered, looking upward as the chamber shook. A metallic voice boomed through the air, "Stand down. You are surrounded by Silvarin royal enforcement." A beam of energy pulsed through the hatch, knocking the traffickers off their feet and pinning them against the wall with shimmering restraints. Lyra stumbled as the shockwave rolled through the chamber, and Evan caught her with his good arm, pulling her close as the ceiling split open. Silvarin soldiers descended in radiant armor, their eyes glowing with the same pale violet hue as Lyra's. One of them knelt before her. "Council Heir Lyra Vallis," he said, bowing his head. "We have come for you." Lyra looked from the soldier to Evan, her breath shaky. "I am safe because of him," she said. "He is the reason I lived." The soldiers turned their attention to Evan, scanning his injuries. One reached out, placing a glowing hand over his wounded arm, sealing the bleeding with soft humming energy. Evan blinked, exhausted. "She deserves her life back," he murmured. Lyra stepped forward, taking his hand gently. "I want that life with you," she whispered, emotion breaking through every word. "Not as a slave, not as a symbol, as someone free." Evan looked into her eyes, seeing not fear but hope, and squeezed her fingers softly. The soldiers opened a path toward the waiting vessel above. Lyra turned to him, her voice trembling with truth. "Come with me." Evan hesitated only a moment before nodding, letting her guide him toward the beam of light. The chamber faded behind them, the traffickers restrained, the dust settling on a world that would soon forget their names. As they rose into the Silvarin ship, Lyra leaned her forehead gently against his shoulder, her voice a quiet promise. "You freed me, Evan, but you also gave me something I never had." He brushed his thumb across the back of her hand. "What is that?" She smiled, soft and real. "A future." And in the glow of the ascending ship, with the universe opening before them, the truth settled between them like a final, gentle vow. He was not a hero. He was just human, and that was enough.